Can you all hear me? Is that thing on? Doesn't feel like it's on. Anything? Am I on? I don't know. Ooh. All right. Can you all hear me now? Is that better? Better? More? More? Okay, so they're saying more. We'll see if they say it in like 5 minutes. Up just a little bit. All right, what about right there? Oh, that feels good. All right, that feels real nice. All right, so when I was growing up, two things were always certain in my younger days. I was always A, with my grandpa, and then B, we were most likely visiting my grandmother at Walmart, where she worked at 1 Hour Photo. It was always most likely both of them. So trip after trip, you would think that 5-year-old Jacob would know the Sevierville Walmart Superstore like the back of his hand. It's what you would think. It's what you would assume after all of my many explorations of Walmart. However, when I was a little bit older, my mom and I went for a grocery trip to Walmart. As we got to the line, for some reason, I do not remember why, decided that I needed to go back and grab something. And so Mom made sure that I knew what register we were at. And I said, yes, Mom, I know. We're right next to the Cheeto stand, if I remember correctly. And I'll be able to find my way back. And so probably 5 to 10 minutes later, probably closer to 5, I realized that Walmart, which at this time still had like 40 registers, it wasn't just all self-checkout, and they make you do just everything by yourself now. So there's actually a bunch of registers. I realized that they had Cheeto stands everywhere. There was not just one Cheeto stand, there was numerous Cheeto stands. Scared and lost little Jacob had to go and have his name paged overhead for his mother so that she could come and get him from wherever I was at Walmart. Because I couldn't find the Cheeto stand like I promised her that I could find. And needless to say, it's easy to get lost in a Walmart. It's a big store, right? And it's also easy to get lost in this world with all that surrounds us today. Well, 2,000 plus years ago, they didn't have a Walmart. There was no Walmart out there in the middle of Jerusalem or Bethlehem or any of those places, but they did have a missing child, and his name was Jesus. This afternoon, as we continue our study over the life of Christ, we're going to focus on Jesus in his teen years. And the story that we find is in Luke 2, verses 40 through 52. Now, if you recall from last week, we studied the first 80 days to possibly 2 years, depending on what scholar you look at. Mary and Joseph and the infant Jesus had to flee from Herod, if you remember correctly, who sought to kill all the children 2 years and under in the town of Bethlehem. And the number of children that were wrongly murdered by this fit of anger that Herod had was anywhere between 12 and 50. So sometimes I think we can probably get in the mindset of thinking it's just hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds. It wasn't. Now, it's still terrible to take just 12 of them. It's terrible to take one of them. But it is probably somewhere in that 12 to 50-ish range. And throughout all of their fleeing, Mary, Joseph, and the little infant Jesus eventually were able to find rest in the town of Nazareth, where Jesus ended up spending about 90% or so of his early life. And I say that because Luke 1:80 tells us this: "And the child grew and became strong in spirit, and he was in the wilderness until the day of his public appearance to Israel." And again, that's Luke 1, verse 80. However, prior to him making his public appearance, we get this remarkable story of Jesus at the age of 12. So 18 years prior to him starting his earthly ministry, if my math is still okay. And it's recorded for us by Luke, where it says this: "And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, and as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. As we dive into verse 40, we can see that this verse right here actually covers the history of about 30 years. It describes the growth of our Lord as a natural and a human growth, right? It's just similar to ours. His life expanded like our human's life would. He learned as other boys would have learned. He obeyed as other children would have obeyed. He waited patiently for this growth. It was something that he patiently waited in until he got to the age when he came out of the wilderness. And so each individual Christian must also have this same patience that Jesus had all up through his growing, even though he knew who he was and who he was about to, or what he was about to do. So often we can want to rush things in life. So often we can want to force things in life. So often we can want to push and push and push and try to rush ahead of the timeline that God has in place, that God has established. Herod tried to do something similar, right? He knew where the prophesied Messiah was going to come, and he said, "Well, I'll just take care of that myself." He thought his power could do that, right? You see this all throughout Scripture. Someone with a little bit of power thinks they can change something that God already has set in place, and that's just not so. So here we turn, we try to push all these things into God's timeline. And it's easy for us to kind of use this example of a little child yelling at his parent and saying, "I can't wait to grow up." And then that child grows up and they learn what bills and responsibilities are. And then they wish that they were still that little child that they claim they didn't want to be anymore, right? The point is that great things take time and great things take patience. I want nothing more right now than to be in heaven with the Father. I want nothing more than that. That would be the greatest joy. But apparently, since I'm still here, I have some more things left that I need to be accomplishing while on earth. So I must be eagerly awaiting that home that awaits before me, that awaits before all of us. We all must be patient and eagerly waiting. The same concept goes for our life today. We must run the race with endurance so that we can reach the finish line that we desire. We must run the race with focus so that we do not get off course. We must run the race with faith that when we reach the finish line, we will receive the crown that we were promised we would receive once we finish that race. Another thing that we can be reminded of here is that Jesus started his earthly ministry at the age of 30. And we have other examples of young teachers throughout Scripture as well, but let us remember to train up our youth. That's what Jesus is doing right here, right? He's listening, right? Let us remember to train up our youth. Let us remember to encourage our youth. Let us remember to give our youth opportunity to grow. Let them shine and let them practice being the leader that God has called them to be. Because one day, they will be the ones leading the generation after them into the truth that we have right here before them. And we must ensure that they are properly equipped to lead that, to teach that. So here in this story, we see such a beautiful example of a child who is eager to learn, eager to hear, eager to chase after the will of the Father. And so let's dive into verse 41. It says this: "Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover." Now, what we must remember about the Passover is that males were required to attend, but the women were not, right? Now, they were encouraged, but they were not required like the males were. However, here in verse 41, we learn that his parents attended Passover. And this really goes to show that how devout they were in their religion, right? That they actually, they didn't just take it for granted, but instead they actually followed the commandments that were before them, right? They were active in it. Now, as Dale has taught just over the Passover, which is one of the three greatest feasts, which commemorates the mercy of God in causing his angel to pass over, as Dale spoke about Sunday morning, the house of Israel on the night that he slew all the firstborn in Egypt, right? This was the final plague that came upon Egypt, and it's what finally made Pharaoh say, please get out of here, leave this town, right? Flee here. You can do what you wanted to do, right? All of this time. It was the final one. And it's the first fruits of the harvest, which were offered in Leviticus 23, 10, 15. The second feast of the three important ones was Pentecost, which occurred, if you remembered, 50 days later, and it commemorates giving the law and its first fruits of the wheat harvest. And in the form of bread, which you can see in Leviticus 23, 17, were offered. And then the third one, which is of the tabernacles, occurred near the end of September or the beginning of October, and it was over the days that Israel dwelt in the tents in the wilderness, if you go back and you remember those stories as well. And so it was observed as a thanksgiving for the blessing of the year. And every adult male Jew dwelling in Judea was required to attend these three different feasts. And Josephus even tells us the members assembled there in Jerusalem often exceeded 2 million people, which is going to come into play here in just a second. So it comes into the parents. So at this point, we kind of start to see that it was the custom of the parents every year to go. And we see more details here in verse 42, which says, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to the custom. And I mentioned this just briefly, but the incident which Luke here reports is the only one given in the period between the return from Egypt, right, when they fled, and Jesus' 30th year when he comes out into the wilderness. I find this to be so interesting because we really don't learn that much about the childhood of Jesus, but at the same time, we can learn so much about his childhood by the way that he carries himself in this story, by the way that he conducts himself throughout this story. Now, if you notice, it says they went up to Jerusalem, which makes a lot of sense because Jerusalem is a higher altitude compared to Nazareth. And the distance between the two places is about 70 miles for us who like to walk or for those that like to drive. And for reference, the 70-mile walk would be almost identical to if you left this church building and you took a left. You went all the way down Veterans, and you took a left onto Dolly Parton. You go to the end of Dolly Parton, then you take a right onto Highway 66. You go all the way down 66, even past the lovely Buc-ee's right there on the right. You take a left to get onto I-40. You go all the way through Knoxville, all the way past West Knoxville. Then you go past Fountain. No, not Fountain City. Then you go past you go past Loudon, and you know what exit you get off at? The exit that is Philadelphia. Not Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, thank goodness, but Philadelphia, Tennessee. That's how far it is, 70 miles from right here if you were to go the interstate. That's how long they had to walk. And so you finally get to the Philadelphia exit. Did that explanation make you a bit tired thinking about it? Now imagine walking it, right? Imagine walking that. Imagine walking that for a church service. The folks were dedicated and made the walk yearly. It was a thing that they did, right? Truly remarkable and should be a great example for us today, right? They went to great lengths, to great extent, to go and be a part of it. It's something that we should all strive for today. So as we can see in verse 43, when it says, and when the feast was ended and they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know. Now, some of your translations might say that it fulfilled the days. But regardless, it was 8 days in all, 1 day for the killing of the Passover, and 7 days for observing the feast of unleavened bread, which followed it. And so what Luke records for us next is super interesting because you can start to piece together all of his different writings, right? All the pieces of his writings. Luke narrates something about every part of the life of Christ. He speaks of him as being a babe in Luke 2:16 when he records this. And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. Luke records Jesus as a little child in Luke 2:40, which we just read, when it says, and the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Now here Luke records Jesus as a boy when he writes, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. And also, let us not forget that Luke is later going to record Jesus as a man when he recounts his life throughout the gospel. Now let us move to the portion of verse 43 where most people start to give Mary and Joseph a really hard time. Luke here tells us that his parents didn't know that he was left behind. However, let us remember that a vast crowd, remember the 2 million people, attended the Passover. It was easy to lose sight in the sight of 2 million people, right? Amid all of this crowd. We also have to remember that during this time, the children, right, especially of his age, were allowed to move around, right? They didn't have to stay step by step with their parents, right? They didn't have the, I don't even know what you even call them, the little backpacks that used to be popular like 5 or maybe 8 years ago that had like animals and the parents had like the leash almost on the kids. I never got that. I guess I wasn't that crazy, but I guess some kids were, right? Some kids just were notorious for running off. But they didn't have to be step by step. So it was expected, though, that the child would return back to the family once night approached. Yet, as you can see in verse 44, it says, supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. Now, as we think of this day's journey, it's most likely that they probably returned by the way of Jericho to avoid passing through Samaria, right? Because of the hatred between the Jews and then the Samaritans. In more modern times, the first day's journey is a short one, and it was probably the same here, right? It was made short so that in order travelers, after they make this short journey, could also return from the city that they just departed in case they had forgotten anything. They could have forgotten a meal, they could have forgotten a blanket, or they could have forgotten a child, like here in this story, right? Now, here in the story of Mary and Joseph, they begin the hunt for Jesus among their relatives and their acquaintances. But as we learn in verse 45, they did not find him, did they? Listen to what it says. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. Have you all ever been gifted something that is one of a kind? Something that is just so extremely special, so extremely important. Have you ever lost that gift? Or maybe have you ever lost something that was given to you that meant a lot to you, right? It was something so precious, something so special. Well, here in this story, Christ, though he was a divine gift to them, was lost. A gift not just from some random friend was lost, right? They didn't just lose something that could easily be replaced. No, instead they lost the divine gift that was given to them. So may we also lose him, though he is a gift from God himself. What a tragic scene that is. You are gifted the most special gift to ever be gifted, and you lose them because of all the commotion around you. And you lose them because you took your eyes off of them in that huge crowd. You lost them because you wanted to go your own way, your own route. Family, we are going to have weak points in our life. We're going to have areas where Satan can more easily attack us. We're going to have struggles. We're going to have trials. We're going to have heartaches. We're going to fall short sometimes. But never lose the gift that is Jesus. Now, what we can see here in this story is that the family of Jesus is searching him out. But we're also going to notice one of the key points in verse 46. Listen to it. It says, after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. 3 days. 3 days they looked for him. What does that tell you about their searching? I've played hide and seek numerous times. I'm going to tell you right now, if I don't find you within 5 minutes, I'm probably calling it quits, let alone 3 days, right? And I'm really, really good at losing stuff around the house. You can ask Aslan. I'm great at it. If it was a job, I'd make a ton of money because I'd be the best one out there at it, right? From my keys to all kinds of things. If we have it in our house, then I am fully capable, I'm fully able of losing that object, right? And then once you find it, you're like, of course, it's the last place. It's always the last place that you look. Right? Well, of course it is, right? And I'm not trying to pick on Mary and Joseph here, but they were clearly looking where? Well, they were looking in the wrong places, weren't they? They weren't looking in the right place. If they would have pondered back on all those things that were told prior to them, prior to the birth of Christ, and if they would have thought about the things that were told to them right after the birth of Christ, they most likely would have went straight to the temple and not waste 3 days looking in the wrong place. Well, family, I have to ask the question, are we looking for Jesus in the wrong place? Are you trying to find him in a moment that you desire? Are you trying to find the Lord where he desires to be found? Are you trying to find him in other people? Are you trying to find him in a job? Are you trying to find him in a relationship? Are you trying to find him in whatever the case may be? We must never search for Jesus among the world, because he is not of this world. He's not of this world, but instead he's above it. Look for him exactly where he told you to look for him. Study his word, draw near to him, and push further and draw nearer to the word. Don't waste your time looking for Jesus in a place he's not. Why would you ever go look? If Dale and I were playing hide and go seek and I knew that he was over here in his office, why would I go spend time out here in the parking lot looking for Dale when I know I'm not going to find him there? Don't waste your time looking for Jesus in a place that he's not, when he is patiently and eagerly waiting for you to turn to him. Now, here in this story, the parents of Jesus are seeking him. The parents missed Jesus on the evening of the first day. They probably returned and sought for him on the second day, and probably found him on the morning of the third day. But do you remember correctly, the disciples of Jesus also lost him in the grave for the part of the first day, all of the next day, and they found him resurrected on the morning of the third day. Listen to Luke 24:21 real quick, where it says this, "But he had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened." So here in a way, Jesus has gone missing for 3 days, similar to the 3 days that he had gone missing in the grave. Which kind of makes me wonder who officially found Jesus in this story here in Luke 2. If you remember correctly, who found Jesus? It was the women that found Jesus first, right? The resurrection. And you can't help but wonder if the same is not true here. And I guess we can ask that question later on. But as we find Jesus, they find him asking questions. He's not teaching, but instead he's listening and he's answering questions, which gives us some quick insight into the method that rabbis used when they were teaching students. It was a method of instruction, and then they would state cases or problems bearing upon the interpretation or the application of that teaching of the law, which would cause the problems, and then they would let the students solve it. They would teach, give a problem, let the students solve. It was almost as if they were doing a case study by case study by case study, in order to help the students grow, in order to help the students be able to reason with people, but also critically think about problems that they could face or questions that they might be able to face. Do you ever sit back and wonder if maybe we shouldn't bring back that style of teaching to our churches today? Case study by case study. With all the problems that we are faced with and brought forth from the world today, we can somewhat feel unequipped to handle all of them, can't we? We can feel unequipped sometimes to answer those questions or to maneuver those situations because we haven't fully trained ourselves to handle all of those situations. Well, here in this training method, they had to critically think through things and reason with people, which is something that Paul did every time he entered. He went and he reasoned with people, something that we should be doing with the world, reasoning with people about the truth that we find here in this text. So as we continue into verse 47 and verse 48, the story develops even more when it says this, "And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, 'Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress.'" Now, depending on which translation you use, it either states that Mary said, "Why have you treated us so?" or it will say, "Why have you dealt with us so?" Her language clearly implies that Jesus had been fully instructed at the time that they were going to depart, and that he was supposed to depart with them, right? It was expected of him to depart with them. However, obedience to his hire, to his father, constrained him to somewhat be disobedient to his parents, didn't it? As it should with us today. Now, I'm not saying that we should walk around and just simply disobey people, disobey our parents, and not listen to a thing, right? But we also have to keep in mind that God is number one in our life, and we must be following his commandments and not the commandments of the world. We must be listening to his words and not the words of the world. We must ensure that we don't fit our schedule, we don't fit God into our schedule, right? But instead, did I just get that wrong? We don't fit God into our schedule, we fit our schedule into what God's plan is. So here in verse 48, we get this saying from Mary that they had been searching for him in great distress, which isn't surprising. But listen to what Jesus responds with in verse 49. And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" What is recorded here by Luke are the first recorded words of Jesus. The first words of Jesus. Here he speaks of the same thing, the Father, to whom he commended his Spirit to in his last words upon the cross in Luke 23:46, when he said, "Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, 'Father, in your hands I commit my spirit.' Having said this, he breathed his last." Luke 23:46. Furthermore, his last recorded words on earth are found in Acts 1, verses 7 through 8, when he says this, "Is it not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority? But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witness in Jerusalem and all of Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." Father. Can you see a trend yet? The Father and the will of the Father was on his mind during his first words that were recorded and during his last words that were recorded. His life, his words, his actions, and everything that he did was for the Father. May we learn as Christians today that exact same example, that exact same mindset. Now, as we turn back to the story in Luke 2, we've made it to verse 50 and 51 now, where it says this, "And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart." Here we can see a similar lack of understanding by the parents of Jesus, and it was the same lack of understanding as, if you remember, the apostles had when Jesus was speaking of his death, right? He told them and he told them, right? And they just weren't quite grasping it, right? They didn't quite understand what Jesus was telling them, because Jesus was looking so far beyond what our own human minds can comprehend. Do notice, though, that Jesus went back with them, and he was submissive to them once he returned. Even though he was a divine gift, he was still submissive to his earthly parents and followed their instruction. Another thing that you can notice here is that after this story, we find no mention of Joseph after this. And the probability is that he soon died somewhere right after this, right? You can also notice one other important thing in verse 51. Mary treasured up all these things in her heart. My goodness, did she have a lot to treasure up. She had this experience, but not only this experience, but if you remember correctly from what we said the past few weeks, she also treasured up the sayings prior to the birth of Christ and also right after the birth of Christ, let alone everything that she's going to experience throughout the life of Christ. Let us also learn from this example the importance of treasuring up the precious sayings from the Father in our hearts today. Let us write his words on the tablet of our heart so we can take it wherever and whenever we go anywhere. You can hear people today, and I've used this example numerous times, but I'll say it again because it still holds true. People say, well, they've banned the Bible there. They don't let the Bible in there. This, that, and the other, right? Awesome. You know what we should do? We should write it on the tablet of our heart. We should study it enough so we know it. That way we don't have to take the physical Bible because I've got it right here and I can take it with me. Because we can be an example. We can be a light, right? We don't have to have the physical Bible when we have it here and we are showing it as Christ showed it. So, we need to be able to take it with us wherever we go. And we have to keep that in mind. Now, if we do these things, if we do keep it with us, verse 52 will also apply to us when it says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." We too can increase in wisdom if we lean into the wisdom that comes from above. We too can grow in stature as we go from infancy to adulthood. We should also grow in stature in our spiritual life from infancy to adulthood, right? We should not want milk and need milk the entire time, right? We should be growing in our spiritual life. Our faith should grow on a daily basis as we continue to walk step by step with Christ. We can grow in favor with Christ as we continue to follow His commandments and grow closer to Him. What did He tell us? If you love me, you'll do what? You'll keep my commandments. If you love me. Chasing after His will and not the will of the world. This evening, you might be saying to yourself that you're chasing after the will of the world instead of chasing after the will of God. Maybe you feel like you've lost Jesus and you're currently walking in the wilderness like Mary and Joseph were, realizing that you turn around and you've lost your gift from above. Well, I have great news for you. You don't have to stay in that state any longer. The Father is calling you home and has opened in His open arms waiting for you. Right there. Don't leave here tonight without Jesus. Just like Mary and Joseph were not going to leave and head back until they found Jesus, don't leave here without Jesus. And don't leave here tonight with things weighing you down when we have a Savior so great and so marvelous. If you have anything on your heart tonight that you need to let go of, we urge you to do that. If you have anything that needs to be lifted up in prayer, we encourage you to do that. Finally, if you're lost and without Jesus, looking for a way to an eternal home that is so marvelous, where there's no pain, there's no tears, come home tonight to the Father and be buried with Him in baptism and raised to walk in a new life. If any of these things apply to you tonight, we urge you to come forward as we stand and as we sing. Brian.